Around 130 people are diagnosed with MS every single week. But there are still many myths and misunderstandings around the condition. We're here to sort the facts from the myths. Will my family get MS?
MS is not infectious or contagious, and you can't pass it on directly to other people. It's not inherited directly too, although family members of somebody with MS do have a slightly higher risk of getting it themselves than the general population. What that means in practice is that the child of a parent with MS maybe has a 1 in 80 chance of getting it themselves compared to 1 in 300 or 400 for the wider population. There are plenty of things you can do to reduce that risk further, of course, making sure your children aren't exposed to smoking, getting them outside, lots of fresh air and activity and vitamin D. But ultimately, we don't really know quite enough about how MS starts in the first place to rule out that risk entirely just yet.
Can I still have children?
Yes, there's nothing about MS that means that you can't have a family. MS doesn't affect fertility in men or women, and in most cases having MS doesn't mean that a woman's going to have a difficult pregnancy. It's not high risk in itself, although you might have symptoms that make it a bit trickier. And actually most women who are pregnant, most women with MS who are pregnant do find that their symptoms get a bit easier during the pregnancy, although they do tend to come back with a bit of a bang after the baby's born. So do make plans to think about how you're going to treat your MS up to pregnancy, through pregnancy and beyond, and have some plans for some good support in place when the baby comes. Now, when it comes to disease-modifying drugs, there's no reason to delay starting them just because you plan to have a family in the future. So do mention that to your neurologist and to your MS nurse so that they can help you make the right decision for you. There are definitely some disease-modifying drugs which it's not advisable to have if you're planning a family in the near future, but there are some which have been shown to be pretty safe right up to the start of pregnancy, even beyond. And it comes down to the risk, balancing the risks for you and the family and making sure that you've got the right decision.
Will I end up in a wheelchair?
So we often get asked, am I going to end up in a wheelchair? And I think it's a big worry for a lot of people. And I think one of the reasons is that's the point when an invisible condition suddenly becomes very visible. You've got a walking aid or you're in a wheelchair, you're suddenly different. And I can understand why people are bothered by that. Now, it's worth remembering though that for every person with MS who's in a wheelchair, you can look around the streets and you'll see many more people who have MS and you wouldn't know. MS is different for everyone. The symptoms you're going to get, the way it changes over time, that's really individual. And there's no real way of predicting what's going to happen for you. Now, I would also say that the other way of looking at this is ending up in a wheelchair is not the end of a story. For many people, the decision to use a walking aid, get a wheelchair, brings a whole new lease of life, where fatigue or pain or mobility problems were causing you to be locked up, isolated, not getting out. Now the world can open up again. So don't think of it as the end of a story. Think of it as a tool. The wheelchair is a tool like any others to help you get the best out of life.
Is MS fatal?
MS is not fatal. The life expectancy of somebody with MS is very similar to somebody in the general population. That's not to say that MS doesn't cause problems in later life though. I think things like fatigue and pain, muscle weakness and spasms, they can all lead to becoming less active, maybe gaining weight, and there are often associated problems associated with that, problems for your heart, blood, breathing function, that kind of thing. So it's a challenge for all of us to stay as well as possible to minimise the chance of disability in later life.
Will I have to give up work?
You won't have to give up work because of MS, at least not right away, and you certainly shouldn't feel rushed into making that kind of decision. Now, if you're feeling that your employer is unsympathetic or is discriminating against you, then there are the Disability Act applies to you from the start of your diagnosis, whether or not you feel disabled or look disabled. So it's illegal to discriminate against you if you have MS at work. And actually, although it can be tough to think about how you're going to fit it in and how you're going to manage, the government has a scheme called Access to Work where they can compensate your employer for any equipment or adaptations that they have to make on your behalf, and also can give you a bit of extra support with some of the costs. So it's definitely worth looking into that.
Find out more at mstrust.org.uk/facts.